with the intention of, introducing a unique nomenclature to describe something, right? And then to utilize our contexts and our entities, our values, and all of these different categorizations for the nomenclature that appears in that protocol. So in other words, to take a word from the protocol and decide whether it belongs
here we go. So
it belongs in our system as a type, a subject, or an aspect, or any of those. Oh, sorry. I'm getting confused by my own.
Breaking down what this protocol means in its meta sense.
In its domain design language sense, yes. How do we transpose what this is saying in this language to operations in that language? Right? Because this is doing something, so we have to copy what it's doing. So in order to make that copy, we have to identify what do those words represent in the context of that language. So one of these words could represent a context, one of those an entity, another a value, a third a service, right? And maybe not just any service, maybe as repository.
So we're expecting the protocol to break down in terms of that first before the more fundamental, like subject and aspect and all that.
Which would
they break down one after another, correct?
By the time you get to subject and object and all of that is when you are trying to implement details that connect with the outside world somehow, right? Like you're adding like custom computational value to something. But if it can be captured by entities, values, events, aggregates, and contexts, right? If it already handles the vast majority of the transformation, then the amount of actual code that dips down into asserting types and aspects and subjects is going to be very minimal. The vast majority of them are going to follow very particular patterns instead. Because the exception is an exception, not the norm. And those would be the exceptions. So the vast majority of protocols are going to be directly translatable to the domain language. And by that point, the person generating the domain language using DDD, that's what it's called, are going to speak exactly the same thing as the person requesting the protocol. They are talking the same nomenclature. One has it translated into the computer operations, the other has it in function as it means something to society. And this third layer of language is bridging. So what you're doing really is getting a set of tools to tell you how to reassemble a protocol nomenclature.
Damn.
So I'm ready whenever you are. Yeah, we need to find something really simple to understand though. Like taking a bite of a sandwich or something.
How about a burrito?
Or a burrito. Sandwich is easier. Pick up, bite.
You can't do that with a burrito?
Well, you can, but you have to unwrap it. You have to hold it a specific way.
It doesn't have to be wrapped.
Well, then that's just going to be all over the place. I don't know what kind of burritos
it's wrapped in a wrap, but not. I mean, the foil doesn't have to be there.
Anyway, let's make it about picking up and eating a piece of tofu.
Nobody likes tofu.
Well, I don't want to appeal to anybody. I want to appeal to everybody equally, as in not at all.
So how about eating a turd
Ugh.
off the ground?
No, I don't want to be that unappealing.
Come on.
I chose something very neutral. This is like way beyond what I had
It's
in
just
mind.
as real as anything else.
But seriously though, like it has to be like one action, maybe two. What's like not dumb that we could use for that?
Thinking smart stuff? That's too abstract.
Okay,
I
let's
like
let
driving.
okay, let's use something that's out of everyday life.
Driving.
To heat something, I don't drive. To heat
Come
something
on.
up,
But you
you take it
understand.
to he- to eat.
Cooking.
No, simpler. To eat
Eating.
something when you're hungry, you take it out of the fridge, you put it in the microwave for a minute,
I don't have
You
a
wait-
microwave.
but it's a relatable experience
I
for
don't-
the audience.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
You-
You've
you-
lost me already.
You take it
completely.
out of you take it out of storage.
Okay.
You put it
Put it
into the
into the
heating
heating device.
the heating compartment.
The heating device. Right now.
and then
we're
you
making
and
sense.
then you wait an allotted amount of time before you take it back out again. Don't forget to turn it on to the proper temperature.
Right. There's lots of. This is complicated, actually.
You take it out and then you take a bite, and then you repeat until gone.
How about when you have to take a shit? You go to the bathroom.
What if you
lift
don't
the
have
lid.
a bathroom?
Well, you go to the designated shitting area.
What if
Right,
there
we
are
have to
no
make it
designated shitting areas?
Generic. There always is.
Where?
It's a meta.
Show me what designated shitting area that's not a bathroom.
There's a meta to it in that you find somewhere.
What if the bear doesn't like you shitting in his forest?
It has nothing to do with it.
Anyway,
That's
I'm
fine.
just giving you a hard time, but I get your point. Sitting down, standing up, fucking waking up, brushing your teeth, anything that requires a single task that we can distill into maybe like 1 to 2 actions.
Hmm.
Pick up and open a can.
And nope, that's not vulnerable to potty humor.
Right. Pick up and open a can. Oh fuck.
Now we're drinking.
Damn it. No, the can.
Triggering.
It's still toilet humor because of can.
Mm.
I failed.
Shit in the can.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. So it has to be something noble.
Lighting a smoke?
Not everybody can relate.
Alright.
How about the act of breathing? Step 1, decide to breathe.
You can't.
Step 2.
If we decide not to breathe, you'll pass out and start breathing anyway.
Yeah. Right, so that's the act. Stop breathing. It's very simple. Here's the protocol.
The second one is pass out.
Yeah. Once you have passed out and resumed breathing. Now that's gotta be dangerous. I don't think you should probably do that.
We're just assholes is all.
What else is there?
Write a note. Pick up pencil. Put marks on paper. Make sure paper is there.
That's pretty noble.
Yeah, relatable. Right? Can relate to writing.
Write a
All right, we're
reminder.
writing.
Wait, what about not everybody can write? Or
Can
read?
Can most people pick up a pencil and make a mark on paper?
Yeah, if you reduce it to that.
That's what
Maybe they're drawing a map.
we're reducing it to that.
Okay.
We gotta find
Fine.
something.
Okay, so writing on paper, marking paper.
Pencil with pencil, not shit.
Paper can be marked with pencil.
No. In this case, it will be marked with pencil. There will be arms required.
Put your shit back.
potentially.
Put your shit away.
Put your shit away. Put your blood away. Whatever other fluid you might want to use.
Right. So, in this subject of marking paper, this pencil type? Because you got some paper.
So let's break it down. Pick up pencil. Put mark on paper.
Instructions.
Right? So we're pick up pencil.
Now we're describing the relationship between the pencil, also the user who is being instructed to pick up the pencil, and that interaction between that pencil and the paper. By put mark on it, it means you
There has to be a
interact
paper.
with the pencil and the paper to put a mark. Correct?
So we have entities. The pencil picker upper. The pencil.
The actor.
Yeah. The actor, the pencil, the paper. We have...
Or the agent. The agent.
So, 3 entities. One of them will be our aggregate, said agent, which has access to pencil and paper. So,
Right.
so being given the command to put mark on paper,
You also need a surface behind the paper.
it's
not gonna
a
work. I mean,
simulated space.
You could use your hand. Okay, it's fine.
It's a simulated space. It's not important.
You're right. You're right.
We're trying to move away from variables, not towards
Complexity. Okay, I get it.
We're trying to get to the protocol.
It's true, but it's not the point.
Right. So here's already some part of the exercise kind of being done. We have established that we need an entity called agent, an entity called pencil, and an entity called paper. We've also identified that the agent will be an aggregate entity, which means that the other 2 entities are not directly actually accessible, and all operations will be communicated through the agent.
Wait, say that again.
So,
I trailed off.
3 entities: agent, paper,
Right.
pencil.
Sure.
The command will be to tell the agent to put mark on paper.
Right.
So, to make that command, we have no need to access pencil. We have no need to access paper. So the agent entity is an aggregate, which means you can't communicate with the pencil, you can't communicate with the paper directly. You can only communicate with the agent, acting as the aggregate of these 3 entities. Itself is an entity, but takes control over what happens inside of its boundary. So you don't
Right.
get access to the paper. You don't get access to the pen. You can't tell them to do anything to each other. You can only tell the agent to do something to them.
Right. Because the environment's
hidden.
described in that higher social layer.
Right. So the context is putting marks down on paper. So we've defined our types, or we define our aggregates and our entities. We are now dropping into a context that says, by the way, agents have a way to put marks down on paper. Here's an aspect, or rather a service, or whatever you want to say, as to how this is accomplished between these 3 objects.
Right. Like there's going to be a data stream coming in which is going to use this service that'll be piped through to create basically the data representation on paper, right?
Yeah. Then once it's been utilized, the subject disappears because we're no longer doing any markings on paper. Everything is back to normal, and we don't know what agents do with papers and pencils and any of that stuff.
In the moment.
in the moment. So basically what we said is that write, what were the two sentences? Pick up pencil,
Mm-hmm.
write mark on paper. So pick up is a method, write is a method. That is something that something who is making marks on
Right.
paper can do.
So markings is like your value that you pass to the function.
So you have now an aspect called paper marker, right? Because that's what they can do. They can mark, and they can pick up a pencil and they can mark it.
Mm-hmm.
So they have all the ability to do that stuff. So now we have to bind the context of agency, putting marks on paper all together.
It's more like a pencil instrument or pencil shaped instrument, whether it's a marker.
But do you see what I'm trying to do with the space? I'm trying to say, okay, part of it is the operation of picking up, and it's just like a separate element of the universe. Part of it is to write down, and that's another separate element of the universe.
Yeah, like generalizing. The aspects can be utilized or be reflected in many different environments.
Part of this is an object doing those operations, and part of this is a context that allows this object to do these operations and be bound all together into a single emergent operation. Right? So we've identified all aspects of that space. So we're saying things
this is like a whole construct. When you're speaking language, it's actually pulling up a whole construct of this simulation.
Yeah. And those basic monikers for how to look at that simulation allows almost any protocol over here to be transposed into something sensical in its own terminology. Right? So by the time you're done creating that space, when you run the protocol, you are never going to talk about subjects or types, and you're not even going to talk about entities or contexts. What you're going to say is you can refer to whatever's been labeled already as this, that, or the other, and say you're going to basically write a sentence out in essentially English that mimics the original protocol that says pick up pencil, write down mark. Like those words is what's going to appear in the way you run the protocol in your service.
Right. Write down being an aspect. Mark being the data stream coming in through that function.
And the context
as
is
a variable on the function.
And the context is just going to say, this is how all of these components come together to do it. So once it's activated in that context, this is how you do it.
So again, to me, I'm reminded of that TypeScript idea of kind of defining the high-level concepts and just having this filter down into actually how the coding is.
Yep.
That way coding mistakes don't happen.
This actually carries through in this language as well, because
it seems very solid.
Because what I've done is I've used that but built on top of it. So not only do you get all of that, you get more of all of that. Like to divide the program up into it, types, subjects, and objects is unheard of.
Who knew that after all this Portal Mountain stuff, we were going to become famous for a programming language?
I might have had an idea. We'll see.
Who knew?
It would be a useful tool, and
it seems big. It seems pretty big.
And if the AI is like completely like on board with just saying, you know what, I can use this language, and it like rivals
makes sense.
really like known.
Later.
Interesting.
I'm probably sitting on it.
Let's see.
You were sitting on
I
it.
see them. Yeah, like the fact that you're not a programmer and you can already see this language as being even more useful than the ones that you've even touched, because it allows you to reason in more intuitive ways, for example.
Well, and be applied to what I want, which is organization.
And it's
like a people,
And you're
society.
do you see how it's allowing us to have a technical, rigorous language, while at the same time being so flexible to adopt
Yeah,
any
it's because
language?
it has, like, as you said, at least 4 layers of language within itself, stacked on top of each other.
With the fourth
Right.
being the arbitrary one, right? The fourth being like your
The
nomenclature.
plain language.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was, interestingly enough, do you know some history about programming languages at all, like their developments? So you've heard of, I'm guessing you would have heard of Fortran and
Yeah.
COBOL.
Sure.
So Fortran is formula language. That's what it's supposed to be. A way to intuitively be able to write mathematical formulas and have the computer figure out what to do with them. COBOL is your same idea, except it's trying to be all business speak like. So business rules and all of that stuff. There's a reason why those things are far in the past these days. Right? Like SQL is another very specific domain language.
Yeah, it seems like it would, well, obviously would have been very rigid, and what do they call it, like process driven, or like.
So, what is this language doing instead? It's adapting itself towards whatever nomenclature already is existing in whatever domain it is, instead of trying to force whatever domain it's trying to solve
To be under
into its
itself,
language.
yeah, right.
Which is why those
And this
languages
is like
failed.
this is having the service idea built into it, I guess, and like
Yes.
the kind of idea that
They actually
membrane
tried.
idea.
They actually tried to sell it as something that business people would be able to write scripts in.
Right. Just because they're such good business people that it translates. Yeah. And then you're going to trust your business logic to run on that.
So, to kind of like circle back into the idea behind this language, you can probably see that the majority of its utility is not going to lie in the nomenclature of types or concepts or methods or any of those low level stuff. It's not even going to revolve around the nomenclature of entities, values, aggregates, and services. It's literally going to revolve in a specific nomenclature resultant out of that, and those are going to be the majority of the tools
Domain
used.
specific nomenclatures themselves,
Yes,
which can be broken down into these other languages.
right.
And that's what makes them coherent.
And so you will have.
Can you describe that a bit? Because we're talking, how do we talk in terms of protocols, like pick up the pencil, write on the paper? And how do we know that's been described well? Like, can't you say,
Well-
like, because we even came up to it, like, well, write on the media. It doesn't have to
So-
be paper,
so
and it can be a
wellness-
pencil-like object. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, we need to real-time
So
work these protocols out.
yeah. Sorry, this was not an attempt at interruption. I was just
Hmm.
ramping up my thought process.
It's good. I'm trying to get my point across to you.
That's why I waited. So, the first component to resolve your question is the entire counter side of you don't really develop any protocol without a correspondence, a set of assertions about its operations. Because that set of assertions is what determines whether you have a protocol that does its thing or not. So what it looks like is, under this condition, what's my result? Under this condition, what's my result? You also set up expectations. I expect this result under those conditions. And if that fails, you know something's
Okay.
off.
So now you've come down from the, I guess what we've called the protocol language, down to the testing language.
Yes.
a-
Of the
as
protocol.
kind of like the abstract meta of the protocol's representation itself.
Right. So,
Which you're saying there has to be this marriage and this
Yeah.
availability of both languages.
yeah. So a protocol.
Okay, but we don't
By
have to
its-
go further down.
No. The protocol, by its mere existence, is telling you that it's supposed to do a set number of things under a set number of conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So all you're doing is you're setting up those set number of things as expectations, and those set number of conditions as a way to test whether the expectations are satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
How doesn't matter, right? It could be just faking it for all you care, so long as the conditions are satisfied. If the conditions change, right? If your spec changes,
Well, that gets
needs to
into
be
a lot.
that needs to be reflected there.
It's a whole other story.
It's
and it's a story of trust.
So there's no staticness to this. This is like the moment. It appears static in that moment, and then it reiterates and rebuilds itself, and reiterates and rebuilds itself. So there's no stopping. There's no concrete point of stopping. It's the same
Right.
problem of the stopping problem of the fucking incompleteness theorem and all of that shit. Representation
Right.
doesn't have a...
We're in a continually flowing and changing reality.
Yeah, the
will.
representation doesn't have like that kind of condition set upon it. But that's not the important bit, nor is it like the most scientifically accurate one. That's not the point, though. The point
Right.
is that...
So how do we keep protocols aligned to what's below them? It's through a testing layer, which is just below, being included as part of the metadata, if you will, of protocols. So you know what it's supposed to do. That way you can take this protocol and put it into its application, right? You need a description of the protocol before you're going to just sit there and run it.
Maybe something that could help, maybe you picture it, maybe the audience, is if you were to like rethink all of this and think about demand and supply. When you place down a demand, that's that set of what it needs to be satisfied, what the expectation is. So it also, you note that in both cases, you're setting that up first.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't even build out the protocol
You're right, yeah.
up until you have your set of expectations at least sorted out to a satisfactory level, right? There's always an iteration going on.
The
There's
satisfaction
no perfection, but there's a satisfaction. There's a threshold.
There's a whole bunch of things that have to come together for any demand to be valid, legitimate, etc. All kinds
Right.
of conditions, and that's what gets passed up.
Right, which is why you know what the expectations are beforehand. And if you don't focus on them first, if you just do Cowboy Neil stuff like what most programmers do, you don't get actually to satisfy those things. It's just doing shit in a fucking, what do you call it? Black hole.
Just for fun.
Exactly,
It's a form of like kind of neurosis, I guess, getting caught up in.
Because creating an algorithm is
pattern.
fun, and getting it to work is fun, and getting it to look neat is fun. But at the end of the day, if your criteria is never satisfied,
Right.
you're not doing anything.
What's your connection with the greater organization?
Right. So it ties right back into our demand and supply language, which, interestingly enough, could potentially be a part of protocols that could, be expressed that way.
We're already going there.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. That feels like somehow feels like a pretty big move to get this kind of language ability, and then to be able to go into domains like trade, supply, demand, and all these archetypes, right?
Yeah. Well, you were talking about how to define our office structure.
Yeah.
Well, we can have types and subjects and aspects and context. I get mixed up because to me, I think of them as expressions of each other. So when I say context, I'm also thinking like subject at the same time because I see the implementation in my head. So
Right.
because and everything is reducible to those things.
I get it.
So
you're
I get
just
mixed up.
naturally slipping down the slippery slope to
Yeah,
the
so
fundamentals.
do forgive me for that if I don't notice it. So what I'm trying to say though is shit.
Primordial archetypes, the offices.
We can start with defining all of the subjectivity aspects of the primordial archetypes. We can then extend them into the
into the
personal
corporate world, and all
personal
that
archetypes,
state.
into the office
Right.
archetypes, and into the
Yeah,
further
yeah. So
institutional
we
ones.
have to actually, we're being shown a way here to dive deeper into the primordial archetypes, into their actual function and structure in a phenomenological way, using the actual primordial stack itself.
And check this out. With the trick of subjectivity, if you activate a subject that treats some of the latter two stacks as perhaps one of the archetypes in the primordial stack, as in the personal, the corporate, and the state one,
Right.
you can now
It's
operate on
like
the entire stack through a
branches.
particular archetype in another stack altogether. Like you can contextualize it as
Well,
that whole archetype.
Right, it has to. So that allows like an AI type system to easily connect back down to the person themselves and their phenomenological experience,
And not having to,
based on the state and the corp interaction and all that kind of stuff.
and they wouldn't even have to drop back out into a more primordial state. They can reactivate a subject that utilizes said primordial state in the context of a less primordial state altogether, and just communicate between those two layers as if it were in the same.
And that, yep, that's like the offices interacting,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, yep.
But not only interacting, but say each office represents one of the primordial archetypes, right? But then you have a primordial archetype representing all of these offices.
Of course.
So you don't have to jump back down to the primordial archetypes, climb back up to the final one, and then try to recreate these in its image. No, you could be using the entire stack and then recontextualize it as that primordial archetype, still keeping the context here.
Mhm. You're talking about it. It sounds like the discussion on entity transformation.
It's also strange looping
Yeah.
because
yeah,
you're
it's
at
like
the bottom by going up.
summarizing kind of ability and to say that it's all one in a sense, so you can easily just.
It is or it isn't, but depending on how you look at it.
Mhm. Yeah, I got some of those vibes. That's all I'm saying.
It's it's like a programmer's way, because you can repeat that loop, right? Like if you end up in this subject and you need to go up those two subjects, but based on this subject, and then you need the corporate stack in the sense from the state stack, from the perspective of the state stack, after the personal stack.
Mm.
So you kind of have like, you can layer it this way, you can layer it then this way, you can layer it this,
Mhm.
this, and this
And
way.
again, this to me, I'm thinking about potentiality and the importance of what kind of model we use as to the impact on the potential of our organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is more towards, I feel, pure potentiality, when you just acknowledge like shit can happen in so many different ways, as opposed to the kind of hierarchical organization where it's like people are bound to certain identities and there's a certain hierarchy structure of management and power,
Yeah.
and you follow the one above you, each just creating a pyramid.
And
Like,
so-
it's very different
And so
feel.
with this language,
And
yeah.
that's a narrowing of potentiality towards the profit motive kind of stuff, right? Like power and profit.
It's a scarcity situation where you only have this many lanes left to track on.
But we do it to ourselves.
Well, we don't have a language to say, wait a minute.
There's no-
it can be so versatile.
Right. And that's why this is so important, I think. Like the Portal Mountain model and all this kind of stuff in this
So,
language.
I don't know
It
if you
gives
got
us
this-
access to the holonic side of life with the potentiality of it
So
included.
I don't know if you've got this vibe though. If you keep doing if you keep going deeper and deeper into subject activations, where upon activation you're backtracking to another layer, and you keep going and so you're going deeper in one sense, but you're doing a reiteration on another sense.
Yeah, it's hard to have a hierarchy, a straight hierarchy. There's
But
looping happening,
so
right?
not only looping, but it goes every which way.
Mhm.
Because there's nothing that says it has to go loop
right.
just down to
And
here. It
this
can go over
reminds
to
me
here.
of like how a type can become the subject or the whatever, all these different ways of looking at it. Like there's so many ways in which something can transform it, and this is like the rational apprehension, the mind calculating brain apprehension of the, let's say, like that's the left brain, the right brain, I like that kind of analogy, whether it's legitimate, but on the right side being like more like paths through a forest. You know what I mean? Like just
And
light.
I'd like to point out another situation that happens here. So I've painted the picture. You're looping inside subjects, inside subjects, inside subjects, inside subjects, and you're internally, because you're looping back in layers. It allows you to like cycle back and reiterate, right?
But looping
so together,
back is a.
so check this out. Check this out.
It's
You
an
went-
emergent. It's a totally emergent.
But check this out. Say you went all the way down to here inside by activating subjects linearly,
Mm-hmm.
but you find yourself as if you've only done this.
Summarized.
Not just summarized, but like it's a completely convoluted subject now because it lost its inner what do you call it, activations. There's like a whole bunch of activations that are now skipped over, and so when you loop all the way back to where you think the beginning is, it's actually you
Sure.
you miss because you've activated
get-
the same subject over and over and
I
over
get
and
what
over
you're
and over
pointing
again.
at.
You the way back might not be actually as clear anymore, and it might not even be straightforward backwards, because so much shit has changed in this looping back and forth. Like the way I presented the loop by reiterating backwards, it could have rechanged it all
This seems
over
to
the place.
really like add to uncertainty or speak to the uncertainty principle, perhaps.
Or why it's such a lost cause to try to represent anything so perfectly.
Right.
Like this situation appears in Jeb.
Right.
He's talking about.
It's
that
like in our
specifically.
higher cognition, it's kind of like objects and all this coming and flying up, but how things arrive at that is a
Now,
isn't
you can argue that the language
as
itself.
peaceful as it seems.
You can argue here that the structure of the language at the very least helps with tempering that. Like you have to exit the scope to go back, but it doesn't provide a way to know whether it's repeating the same cycle over and over again. So it has that stopping problem.
Interesting.
So it could very well
So
think
is that
it's
part of a meta language?
No, it's part of something that needs to be known when you're
Like-
using this language.
Sometimes you don't know when you're looping, I think.
Well, that's called programmer errors or logic errors.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it will come down
I feel like break time. What are you saying? Quick one?
to. Sure.
Yep. And then we shall reconvene on topics, thoughts, ideas.
Well, we kind of paused on doing the full transformation of the protocol here to the
writing on a paper we're talking about.
Yeah, because we identified two statements.
We want to break
Well-
that down.
So we identified how we would treat each part of the statement.
Mhm.
We want to now assemble the statement back down here using those parts.
Not in the testing layer, but in the one below this
The one that's
kind of higher.
the one that
emergent
satisfies
language.
the test.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Sounded good. And with that, we'll burp. Break that bubble. Bubbly, bubbly, bubbly.
So why don't you repeat your comment?
I don't know. What did I say?
Languages.
Oh, just that's neat that what we've just been talking about as like a sort of stack of languages is not incongruent with the whole Hellenic model stacking and all that kind of stuff.
And the fact
And
that
I thought that's really neat.
and not just that, not just like not incongruent. What it's aimed at, right? Like practically by design, is to facilitate a framework for disconnected languages,
Yeah.
right? Like it has
We
that
brought this
capacity.
up before, haven't we? It's like a meta language.
Yes.
Just
So-
reflected in other domains, I guess you would say we've encountered this.
Reflected is a good thing. Now, that has to be reminiscent of something already, like another concept we've been discussing earlier.
Polycoin,
Not just the polyquan, no.
polyglottic polycoin.
No.
Not just the polyglottic.
No. I
polycoin.
meant it wasn't about. I really meant it wasn't about the coin itself.
I
What-
am seriously reminded of that though too.
Okay.
Think
No,
about it.
that's fair. That's fair. But my what I was thinking actually was something different.
Go ahead.
I was thinking about like
I used up
the
all my guesses.
polymorphic machine. Because if you think about what the polymorphic
Yeah.
machine is,
It's in situation. It's very
And
much
what would it
geared
do-
towards organization.
and so
of people.
what would it do when it's in the same environment but the context switched for it? Like, so the same entities in the ontology that are there
Right.
will get recontextualized, right?
Right. You may see this as the crashing down of a certain corp and rising up of other corps within the.
Or certain subjects deactivating and others are activating. Or a remixing of subject activation for the situation.
This reminds me of like a task prioritization, just having a task stack, a to-do list, if you will, the meta schedule. That's what it reminds me of. Because how do you calculate all this? You're constantly shifting subjects from one to the other, right? That's the environment we're talking about.
So
How to juggle all these balls.
So one of the ways in the language that this is actually handled is that if you're inside a subject activation and you're inside a method processing something and you need to return that value back, right? Or rather, sorry, that's not the beginning, that's the middle.
Right.
So you are in a specific subject and you need to call a method of a specific object to get a value back. That method call could potentially result in insane amount of subject activations that completely make it impossible to understand what it is that you're going to get back.
Right.
However, what you can do at the point of the call is called a capture. And you say, regardless of that,
Mm-hmm.
if I happen to capture a value of this type, we're going to go and process it this way. And we're going to continue from the point of where I made the initial method call with the continuation value that so I get a value back, I process it, and I say continue with whatever my result is.
So
that result gets sent back to the point of the call. So all those subjects are now gone.
Hold on, but wait. It sounds like it's describing an ongoing process that keeps taking a value in, but continuing.
So you're inside a method, so you're performing an operation. That operation could activate subjects indefinitely. Eventually, at one point, one of them is going to do what's called a throw. It's going to throw you a value back. At that point, all the activations of the subjects go back to the first point in code that is expecting a value of that type. So it's going to unwind itself backwards.
So something has been found that was looking for. This is the end of the processing. Okay. So
And you-
you're
and you
you're
throw that
describing
value
that
back
I
in
don't care. All this shit can happen, but as
in
soon
between,
as
yeah.
this nugget of description happens,
We throw it back.
then I am again the main
And eventually,
main program.
yeah, and eventually you'll come back to the most outermost subject that's like, I'm interested in that value. That's the value I'm interested in. If no subject that was been activated has ever been interested in that value, it's not going to affect anything. It's just going to continue to unwind. Basically, regressing back to where it was looking for said value in the first place, the place where you called that method to open up the subjects, and you're saying, I want that value. So it's going to catch that value after it's been thrown, and then you're going to continue using that value from the subject that was interested in it. And
I don't really get this I want that value thing. Like, where does
So-
this
so you know how you say something like,
mysterious peeping Tom?
well, no, it's like int sum int
But
total.
where does it come from? Who,
Look,
who
look.
wants this value?
So you'll have an expression in your code, something along the lines of int total equals sum array, like list of values. That point where you're looking for the total is the point where you're saying, hey, do a sum function, do that service. I want to know what the total is when you're done. So what will happen in this situation is potentially is that it will
Okay, that seems pretty simple.
subjectify it further down the road, and eventually at some point it will be like, I know what the value is, throw it back.
Like, that's a pretty like protected term, total. There's a certain point at which a subject comes up with a value for total,
Well,
and then that's when the whole thing folds back because it's
Right.
it's sitting there waiting
and
for,
all of
for
this
something called total to be.
and all of this happens inside what's called a capture block. So you're setting up the expectation you're going to be capturing thrown values.
Yeah, I get you. So this is the way of dealing with the fact that there are so many different, it seems like, players on the field, and you're just kind of like tossing a ball out there and seeing
Which
where
one will catch it,
bounces, what happens. Like, it might as well be like a live sports ball game.
So it's like a more generic concept of the return value of a function that when it returns it directly to the spot it's been called at. You know that.
Wait, what's your premise here though? Again?
So you know if you call the sum function on like a list of values, it returns you a value, you assign it to a variable. That's a return statement.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of return statement that doesn't necessarily wait for you to say where you're assigning the value to. It just says keep stepping out of functions, keep going backwards. So like, get out of my sum function. Oh, you're not looking for the sum here? Get out of the function that called my sum function. Oh, you're not interested in it here? Get out of that function. Keep going, keep going.
Yeah, I see.
Until you reach...
So you're talking about like walking contexts up the mountain range, as it were. Find up or down a particular peak on the mountain until one layer happens to
respond.
want
yes.
that.
Yeah, so eventually
Right.
you'll unwind to the point
This
of like,
is actually-
I want to catch that value.
This is the networking of the program itself and how it networks for its different agencies, if you will.
Mm-hmm. It's a
Just
general...
these kind of iterations up and down, context groupings.
So you can think of a return as a very limited case capture that deals with a single level jump into a function and back out. Whereas a true capture could go several deep layers, and then eventually one of those layers throws a value, and it unwinds back, and you deal with that value and continue on from where you were interested in it.
I think I kind of get what you're saying, and by true, it kind of made me think of like, again, this like throwing a football, seeing where it lands. But
It's closer to that, yes.
you're not. It's not like procedural. Like, you know, you're gonna get this value, go up and down.
No, because you never know what subject is going to be active by the time the throw happens. Because what if there was a couple of different decisions that activated, reactivated, deactivated, and again reactivated some subject? So it could have been this one, or this one that had the throw in it.
Mm-hmm.
And each one could be a different type. And you catch it by type. So once you get it in the side here,
Mm-hmm.
you not only know who threw it, you don't care who threw it so much as what was thrown.
This makes me think of sports betting, but like how to, like being able to bet on whether a football was thrown by, this person or that, or who caught it, or like you could break down a game into this using this language
Yeah.
in terms that you can just say such generic statements and even bet on them, as in like a football hit somebody with a
Well, what you're seeing is correct.
even jersey or something.
You're hitting on the correct point. You no longer have what do you call it? Shit.
Like this attachment to the reification
Chaos
of
versus
the
order.
player.
Sorry. Fuck. I'm forgetting the very specific word on this, but I hate that.
Well, damn.
Um,
Reification.
Not no. The linear logic. Determinism. That's what I was thinking. It looks like this language takes away the ability to look at programming with a deterministic point of view and starts to look at it more like odds. That's what you're getting
Right.
at.
Mm-hmm. And this is part of
Interestingly,
the testing routines, and why that has to be mated to the actual protocol itself, right?
yes. Interestingly, what possibly else do we know of that consistently tells us it functions on odds? Quantum mechanics. Sorry, it's just like it's so
Right.
fucking obvious,
Mhm.
isn't it? Like the connection, not the it's not
Sure.
a linear connection.
Like
it's
going
a
down to
metaphorical
the
one.
physics science, and all that
But
kind
we've
of stuff.
seen a phenomena appear
The
here
uncertainty
too.
principle
Right.
with the position of an electron and all that in a cloud. You describe it using odds.
It's like this uncertainty. it's the uncertainty of the subject position.
If you happen to look at a moment in time, here is your odds of where you're going to find that
So, that's a subjective description, right? When
you look.
when you
Right.
Interestingly enough, this entire description also sees the same problem. Depending on your subjectivity, that's what you're going to see.
Right. It's a flat up admission.
It builds up right into that
Mhm.
situation.
By having a language to describe what's happening. This is the meta language, self-reflective.
Holy shit! What if we adapt this to quantum physics?
Why not?
Nomenclature.
It's one thing at a time, but hey,
No, that's just like. I know I'm like reaching over here. This is not I'm not confused about my own limits. This is not that. But the fact that
let's
it
not
arrives
get
at
too
odds.
high
No,
on
but the
AI.
fact that it arrives at odds, right? Like, and the subjectivity activations, let's call it what, spectrum, or what? What do you want to call it? Like you know how it can stretch out into almost infinity until it like throws something. Like a recursive
Sure.
function, like a recursive function would. You know how recursive
Yeah.
functions work, right? So it could potentially carry that connotation with it. It's too.
Hmm.
So what's fucking interesting about it is like if you adopt the concept of moment to the subjective view and keep slicing it step by step by step by step, you get the same picture that we're describing in the diagram. And secondary to that, you have the cyclical situation in which one concept is represented by another concept, and then you step through again the same concepts over and over and over again, and you don't literally know which specific frame of that was a true beginning because they're all fed into each other. And on top of that, the
Right.
result, and on top of that, the result you get back
Mm-hmm.
is the result that, you know, you decided to stop at. Because of like you're allowed,
Arbitrarily.
yeah, because you're allowed to go to this point or that
Yeah.
point or the other point.
Reminds me of the idea about um, always being bootstrapped into cognitive awareness or whatever. Like there is no before that. It's just a, kind of
Oh, yes.
the eternal
Boot-
viewpoint.
I think that was the whole point of adopting the word bootstrap, because bootstrap indicates that when online, quite literally, it has there's zero capacity to know before online. Like there is no
Right.
there is no before online. There's
And
only
the
being
metaphor being
online
a computer going through its BIOS sequence and
to
then
instantiate itself. Yeah, the
then
operating
hitting the
system.
hard drive and like starting to load operating system and all that. But once the operating system's loaded, it doesn't know about in its
Not
own
be
in its
lo-
own terms and languages about the CPU code, the
Or
BIOS
being
and all
offline.
that shit.
Or what offline even is. It just
Right.
knows about running. And
Mhm.
so in the same sort
In the
of
same
spirit,
way we perceive a set of objects in front
No,
of us.
not even that.
In the moment.
in the same spirit as we never actually think of ourselves as not being alive. Even if we imagine past situations, we're in them. We're playing the movie,
Of
right?
course.
Like they're
Right.
part of us, so we're in them. Maybe not explicitly with like, you would describe it that way, sure not, but you are creating that thing to begin with. So even past anything past that you can think of, you are making that past. You're there, right? If you go 10,000
One would
years into the
assume.
past to talk about like the fucking pre-civilization species, you imagine yourself running around in your forest, right? Like you're there, you're in that forest, or you're watching somebody else do something. All of those,
Sure.
all of this to say, isn't that like you existed back there, like in the traditional physical sense, but that like there's no conception of a past in your mind that can exist without you being there. So there's no beginning. You don't have a beginning in your own mind. It never
Mhm.
arrives there, never, and it
Right.
never arrives at your end, either.
Well,
So
how
so
does
from
that-
that perspective, it's like an eternal it's an eternal
Yeah.
state of things.
It's kind of funny to imagine the past.
Look, again, this is not an ontological rendering, right? I'm not talking about being in the past because you feel like you're in the past. I'm talking
I
about the
think
only way your
this
past
kind
is
of-
available to you is through you.
Points to a typical disconnect between the mind and body. That kind of understanding or sense of that what emerges as your understanding and your feelings comes from this existence of the body being there. Right? There's kind of like
Well, yeah,
It's
it's
the
it's literally
codependency,
the
if you
body
will.
doing things body does,
Right, so-
that come out that reflect through as emotion.
to imagine back then. Right?
But this is the thing.
Just as,
All you can
floating
do-
eyeballs, you know.
all
that
you can
you're
do is
probably
imagine it.
saying the normal person would imagine themselves as a floating eyeball, basically, floating eyeballs.
Or
Like
feeling the
in
fear
different
of the run
places.
of whatever they're running away from, or like being in the situation they've imagined as a participant of the. How do you imagine the past? Sometimes it's abstract. Sometimes it's like as if you were there. Sometimes it's
Maybe that's temperament dependent,
sometimes it's like random objects.
but like I think people usually would have a subject in mind, like dinosaurs roaming.
Either way, like yes, the floating eye.
And
That's-
there's
that's-
just no
that's-
image of the self.
Yeah,
in that
there's no
in
image
that
of
picture,
the self,
you know.
but there is self in that image simply because that's the only thing that creates the image.
The floating eyes.
So the point being,
We know there must be eyes at least.
so the point being is that the running system asserts itself to be a permanent existential element, right, of its own running. Because
Mhm.
it doesn't perceive its own beginning and it doesn't perceive its own ending, it only perceives its own activity. And I mean, like, you feel this, right? Like, it's not like something I'm saying out of my own ass. It's like you try to look back into your past and all you can think of is you being there. And any point behind that past is basically you placing yourself being there. So your mind doesn't actually detract from being in all of those stages. That's from the perspective of the bootstrapped system. That doesn't mean that somebody on
I
the
think
outside of the bootstrap can't see the beginning and
I
the
think,
end.
again, you would have
Just
to
like you
look
can
at it.
see the boot up of a computer, you can see it's shutting down. The fact that the operating system can't see that doesn't detract from it being a reality either.
Right, but how to describe it, I think, is dependent on temperament a lot, potentially. And I think many people may think into their past differently, maybe based on their comfort with how they like to perceive a reality,
Well,
right?
More often than not, this is like just Buddhist assertions, so take them with some grain of salt, I guess. From the Buddhist perspective, what happens is usually... Sorry, repeat what you just said. I want to make sure I get it right.
Just go for it, man.
No, I need to rehear it.
I was just settling in, got my hot chocolate all cozied in, waiting for Buddha's grand
No. This is
deposition.
relevant. Let's back up and repeat the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Go again. What was the topic?
Well, we were talking about how bootstrapping works.
Mm-hmm.
That from the perspective of the bootstrapped, it's like an eternal perspective.
Right.
Have always been. From the perspective of outside the bootstrap,
You can imagine things.
You can actually see the beginning and its end. So it's like watching a person being born and dying. So you have seen their coming into and out of existence
Through
and yet
imagination.
they have not.
Right. So we witness people in our lives having died, which we accept that we are like them, that we are a type of being just like them.
But from our perspective, our life extends beyond our own death.
It's an interesting topic. This is the eternalism comes from this mistake of seeing this as the way thing is.
Well, it gives it discredits both, because on the one side it is eternalism, and on the other side it's not eternalism, and both are right, both are wrong in some sense.
Right.
You can't get to it's not eternalism from...
It's not a battle between which one is right.
Exactly.
Either side. That's as usual.
Exactly. So the middle way is really to ignore both extremes. So the middle way is not saying this is false, false. It's not saying this is false,
it's like
false.
It's an emergent tip above the discourse saying, hey, there's neither one. It's actually...
The eternal bootstrap.
They're both kind of valid, but...
the perpetual bootstrap.
Proceed.
Right. And the perpetual bootstrap explains away why it's not exactly either. There is eternalism, there is nihilism, and neither of them are really the real situation.
Right.
Bootstrapping is the real situation. I wish I remember what the fuck I was going to say, though. But it seemed important at the time.
It always does. Man, I've lost so many comments like that over the times. But, however, I feel like we really have progressed with our work here to the point where I'm sure it's water under the bridge at this point. Like, it was probably something I thought of, which 2 years later, we really nailed. So, I have these feelings of, I know that I've lost certain ideas and all that.
That's like my entire existence, man. What I'm actually really interested in walking away from, knowing there is isomorphism between you and me, is the language. I would never expect you to kind of pick up on getting the right syntax of it I would only expect things like
Well, we've been talking and we've had some understanding.
yeah, but
Like-
my goal is to be like, if you were to like try to write something out using the similar syntax.
I'm sure I could do it. You know what I think? That what we've talked about so far has ingrained or speaking about concepts. Remember concepts in the language, the idea of language structure. Concepts that can allow me to construct and build things in that mid layer.
Yeah, so
Right.
the mid layer would be your context, right? Entities,
The organization
values,
stuff.
the aggregates, services, and then so services internal and external. I fucking hate the fact that both use the same words, so maybe we'll clear that up later. Testing, which is like a side show, and
That's the third 2.5 layer.
events. Yeah, the 2.5 layer is all the expectation settings.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so with like application, entity, aggregate, service, event, you can actually get the majority of functionality figured, like what it's all about. Are we creating entities? Are we changing it? You know what I mean? Like all of these operations are so ubiquitous to what entities are. You don't really have to think about it, except maybe
Generalized.
Like, yeah, like you
It's all supposed to be
create, update.
The aspects seem to be shifting from all over the place.
It goes like this: create, show, update, delete.
What does that?
That's what the life cycle is usually like bound to for an entity. It's created, it's observable, it's changeable, and when observation and change are no longer relevant,
I guess
it's destroyable.
what I was saying, like, and I appreciate this, and this just adds more to me, like what you're talking about. I think with I thought it was the mid layer, but about concepts, just as one of these areas of knowledge. Being a higher layer that kind of controls. Remember, in like the context of like types, what's that, Java, TypeScript, right?
Mhm.
You know, the higher layer kind of constraining what's going on below, so you don't mess up types.
Yeah.
Like type security and all that kind of stuff.
So types do that for your
I
values.
feel like I've learned a lot of concepts, which can help me to actually use the language, but I don't know how to use it
Okay.
yet. You see what
Okay.
I'm saying? Like, I
So-
thought concepts was one of the layers, like one of the types.
there is a keyword concept. So what the concept keyword
So
does...
I could be confusing that.
No. You're using concept in a different way. It's fine. There's a concept in the lowest layer. All it does is says things like, does this type satisfy whatever requirement? It's basically saying yes or no to whether or not this code is going to be applicable right now. So if you're expecting a concept to
Does this relate to the triads? Remember the triangle diagram where it's like in the academic triad, there's like, I thought concept was one of them, but
no,
like the model.
No. This is more. This is like a more technical term.
Maybe that's confused me a bit because I've tried to generalize the use of the term concept here.
Well,
in that sense,
it's isomorphic.
So I think that
let's put it this way. They're isomorphic to
Good.
each other.
Nice.
The use of keywords in the language is going to be way more specific than the connotation of the word concept in model speak. So there's going to be differences between model speak and combo language.
Combo language. Okay. We'll get something better.
So concepts in the language, we've got to get going.
It is about time, eh?
Yep. So concepts in the language will
Does she fly?
Constraint things like methods and classes to be able to work with types they don't know beforehand about, but they can assert that they provide certain functionality. So they can say things like, I need you to have a method called X.
Right.
And then in your code, you're saying, I'm accepting something that satisfies this concept.
And it's kind of
And
a
I'm-
global X.
And I'm telling it to call X when I'm called.
Mm-hmm.
So if you try to call the function that accepts this concept with a type that doesn't satisfy it, it's going to be like,
Right.
you called my function wrong. But if you don't have concepts, what happens
So
is
this
that
is interesting.
what happens is that if you call it allows
To
that
me,
to happen, and
this
by the
puts-
time you call X, it be like, I don't know what X
This
is.
puts responsibility on your shoulders, on the shoulders of the main application, to go out and make sure that what it's stepping in is what it thinks it is.
Yeah.
And should be. So that's like a complete reversal of the onus of responsibility of, is this going to work?
Right.
Which is interesting.
And you're also seeing this in the
it's
return
built
values.
it's built top down now instead of just presumed to be known.
And you're also seeing this in the return values. If you're getting something that you never capture, it's a fucking error.
And so what's it called so far? The language?
Combo language.
Combo language.
But that's the AI doing its thing.
Combo. You got to put two C's in front of it.
What do you think I'm thinking
And
of
have an
here?
uppercut. Have an uppercut. Anyways, that was sweet. So we spent the whole session
Did we,
talking
finish
about
the beer?
maybe
Nice. I'm gonna grab the last one if you don't mind.
go for it. It's all you.
All right, we do gotta run if
Yep.
possible. I'm gonna take a leak and I'm ready.
I thought I'd be more out of my element than I was, but so we had I think a great time.
I've prepared for this for years.
Well, with the help of AI, we've advanced.
I have put so much lube up your asshole at this point.
No, I know I've been I've been buttered up. We'll say that. And with that, we're out, lads and gents.